Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 57th edition of the Frank and Stan Chat. And yes, we have a guest this week, a guest I have known for many years. And I'm delighted that he's joining us. So I'll do the big fanfare just to hold back a little bit from doing that. And before I introduce the guest, I'll say, good morning, Stan.
Good morning. On a wet Welsh morning.
Yeah, well, I think, we're all in Wales. So that's a little clue for the guest as well. So we're all in Wales. You're in your little lodge. Is that what they're called? The posh lodge?
Yeah, it's a caravan.
Caravan in Benlec. So, yeah. And our guest, hello, Barry. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Everyone. Yeah, diolch yn fawr, bore da. Wel, Abertawe in Cymru. So yeah, good morning from Swansea in Wales. Yeah, so it's good to be part of the Welsh edition of the Frank and Stan show.
So how do we know each other, Barry?
I don't know. I think we bumped into each other when I was very young, I remember. But you seem to be far more experienced and older than me when I first met you. But you were 16 months old when I kind of popped out. So yeah, we've been brothers for, I won't say for how long, because that would be an embarrassing admission at the first part, but yeah. So, and we've both had careers in education, and very different very similar, but often very different as well. So we've covered quite a lot of bases between us in terms of educational experience and teaching and so on.
I think for a time, Stan, we had similar roles developing frameworks. Barry, I think you did that for a while in Estyn, and I did that in Ofsted. And actually, I think part of the reason why I was keen for Barry to join us was just to sort of see if we can tease out what some of those differences are between the Welsh system of education and the English system of education, because there are some significant differences. But anyway, before we do that, let's ask Stan, what's caught your eye this week, Stan?
Well, yeah, a short one for me today. It was just more language, more weasel words, more ways of actually not saying what I need to say, but daren't say. So Matt Hancock's, the ones that I caught, and I'm sure there are more if it becomes quite an interesting topic of conversation if you watch and try and spot the weasel words. My favorite one was I don't think I'm aware of that, which just is bizarre. I'm either aware of it or I'm not. I can't think one way or another. There is no evidence that I have seen to cause. So not there's no evidence, but nobody's presented him with the evidence, and the old I have no recollection of that.
Yeah.
But three things that clearly just cover up. And for those of us who've worked with children for a long time, my wife is sitting next to me going, you just look at his eyes.
You're absolutely right, Stan. Let's say you were interrogating some children because something bad had happened in school, and they gave you all those three replies. Oh, I have no evidence of that. Oh,
yeah.
You wouldn't really feel as though you were satisfied by their answer, would you?
No.
But
I just say watch their eyes. That's what I always used to do. But their eyes give them away. And Matt Hancock at some points was really showing all those facial signs of I'm going to try and think of a way around this where I don't actually compromise what I want to say.
I think it's also when you bear in mind sort of Michael Gove and the government were actually sort of found to have been in breach of the law, but actually sort of being able to sort of in a similar way sort of just bounce that away as if
only
that's
parts
not really
of what he did.
Oh yeah.
Only parts of what he did were against the law. So that's like saying, well, he's a burglar, but only the bit where he broke into the house was illegal. The rest of it was fine.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to a colleague called Nick Lowry, who I think Stan, said, what a concern this is in terms of, if senior ministers are not willing to be held to account by the law, actually, what does that say about society and about law and order generally? And this government in these 57 editions, we have covered on many occasions, instances where whether that's bullying by the Home Secretary, which was found to have happened, but then was disregarded by the Prime Minister. There's just a catalogue of occasions when actually people should have been held or have been held to account, but actually have not been punished for their their sins, really, in a way.
What it feeds is this general feeling, isn't it, that there's one law for them and one law for the rest of us? Because I know that if I break the law and people find out, they're not going to have such a generous interpretation of, oh, well, he only broke a bit of the law there, so we can be, we can ignore that. I caught you speeding, but you were only speeding for 10 miles out of your 100-mile trip. So really, we'll just forget that.
On the law of averages, you weren't,
I don't recollect the journey at all.
That's right. That's right.
So
I wasn't aware that I was speeding at 100 miles an hour, so therefore it didn't really happen.
What about you, Barry? What's caught your eye this week?
Well, it's a little bit strange, my one, but I've been looking, obviously we've all been reading COVID stories, and there's all stories about the COVID side effects. And I have an ex-colleague whose son has got long COVID, and I got an email from him recently, and I was kind of thinking about side effects. And then I got some new medicine from the doctor, and in the pack was the little leaflet that you get, telling you everything about the medicine, what it is. And I noticed that it had this big section, possible side effects, very common, may affect more than 1 in 10 people, and then uncommon may affect 1 in 100, and then very rare 1 in 1,000. I just started to think about side effects and what they were, and to relate that to the world of education, really. Sorry, that's my phone bleeping away. And how, when I thought about educational research and lots of the education books that I'd read, they were all about proving the effectiveness of something. And they hardly ever, very rarely, would concentrate on what the possible side effects, negative side effects, unintended side effects might be of adopting that particular practice or that particular policy. And so I just started to think, well, side effects are actually inseparable from effects, but medicine is aware of that and does something about it. It tries to think about what the possible side effects may be, so that you as a patient can be informed about the risks that you're taking when you adopt this particular medicine. But it seemed to me that when we have policies and projects and approaches projected at schools, they're not told about what the possible side effects might be. They're just told, do this and it will work. Do this and it's better than what you're doing now. So you can chuck out what you're doing now and do this and it'll be effective. And then I started to think, well, maybe this lack of awareness of side effects and risk around approaches and projects has led to these great big pendulum shifts that we see in education all the time, where everybody rushes off to do this and nobody tells them what the side effects may be. But the side effects inevitably come out. Oh, there's this problem, there's that problem, there's this other problem, there's another problem. And before you know it, everybody thinks, do you know what? I wish we hadn't started to do that because we've got all these things that have happened. Yeah. And then somebody else comes along and says, well, that's terrible what that is. Why don't we all do this? And then everybody goes rushing over there to do this new thing because that thing has come up and it says, this is effective, this will work. So it just focuses on effects all the time, but not the potential side effects.
It's really interesting that, because when you were talking, it's making me think about systematic synthetic phonics.
I was thinking that too.
and the thing for me was, this is the silver bullet, and actually, I had a meeting with Nick Gibb about 6 months ago, where he was very balanced, very balanced in his response to this, saying that we were never advocating that all other aspects of reading development should be pushed away. But actually, in their desire to get everybody to do systematic synthetic phonics, they forgot to make that point, that everything just piled into this. And so there was that sort of steep shift or swerve towards that approach. And then, of course, they realized, oh, my goodness, they're not doing all this other stuff, so we better emphasize that.
They didn't forget, Frank, because at the time we were bidding for some training work in phonics, and we were absolutely slaughtered for having books in our list that weren't phonetically decodable, and we weren't to have any. It wasn't that you had those to support, you weren't to have any. So I mean, it wasn't a forget, it was a this is what we're going to do. Or by the time it got down to the people who were monitoring it and delivering it, it was phonetically decodable books only. In fact, only recently I've had an inspection where somebody's criticised for a mixture of books in the reception class.
So what happens in Wales, Barry? I mean, you've been responsible for, well, what, in the past, not now, but were a sort of a lead advisor, a lead inspector for English, I think. You know, I mean, you must have
we've tried to have I think a blended approach. You know, particularly the inspectorate and the education system as a whole has tried to kind of hold back from going down the let's just do synthetic phonics and nothing else approach. We've tried to have, I'm sorry to say this, Stan, an evidence-based approach, you know, where if children are learning to read well with a mix of systems, then why chuck the baby out with the bathwater? You know, and I think in terms of these risks, you know, any intervention, you know, I've never heard somebody say this intervention may improve your children's test scores or, you know, whatever it is. But if you do it, it may make them hate reading for the rest of their lives. You know, nobody ever says anything like that. And all the benefits, you know, I feel a bit old fashioned, but all the benefits of look and say and word recognition and things like that seem to, you know, you come across children who will try to break down every single word into its phonetic elements rather than see the whole word. And it's like they're stuck doing this. They can't get out of this because it's been kind of driven into their minds. But so what we try to do is keep a blended approach, but it's very, very difficult in Wales. I mean, we're only 4.5%, I think, of the UK population. And so publishers will respond to the English situation because it's such a dominant market. And so lots of materials and resources and websites and things will push what is very much an English agenda. And then it becomes very difficult for schools in Wales because everything is, you know, the wind is just blowing enormously strong in one particular direction. And they will feel those effects, and they have done. But we've been trying to kind of hold the line around a more blended approach to children's reading. Because the key thing is we want children to enjoy reading, don't we? To be good readers and they enjoy reading. We don't want them turning into little automatons who can kind of break down, you know, phonetics, and that's all they can do. I found it very, very odd when you have those tests which had nonsense words in, which children had to then say because, you know, to check that they knew what their phonemes were. But the word that they said was actually a nonsense word. And that struck me as, oh, that seems a bit peculiar. You know, we've gone somewhere else now to a kind of theoretical word, a word that does not exist. We're in the world of theory here. We're getting children to respond theoretically to something at a very young age, rather than to the real world in front of their eyes, you know, the world of words that they're going to bump into. So
we don't learn either, do we? Because it was exactly the same with the literacy when that came in. Yeah, because everybody was told, you know, you don't need to do, you know, reading anymore. Don't need to send reading books home. All that can go. And then, you know, not long later, people are saying, but actually, children's reading isn't improving. Their ability to analyze a section of a book is improving, but their understanding of the book and the enjoyment of the book has gone completely. I remember. I mean, I'm old enough to have been ahead at that point. And I said, we're not doing any of that. What we'll do is we'll carry on with what works at our school, which was good. And then when that shakes itself out a bit, we'll pick the best bits from it and add it to what we do. But it wasn't popular within the local authority. It certainly wasn't popular with, there was a grand meeting where they were launching it, and I just happened to say we weren't doing it. which was fantastic because the first thing was, well, you have to do it. And I said, well, actually, I don't. It's not a statutory part of the curriculum. Well, you have to have something just as good. I said, well, I don't have to have that either because there is no statutory requirement. Right, well, we're going to monitor you. So I said, okay, what are you going to monitor? He's not doing it. He's still not doing it. He's still, there's your first 3 monitoring visits done. And then an HMI came over and said, I'm really interested. Which school are you from? And I said, I'm not telling you. And he said, no, seriously, which school are you from? And I said, no, seriously, I'm not telling you. Because I'd just done 18 months with Ofsted. So I knew that there would be a coincidental visit at that point.
Well, that's the bad thing, isn't it? You know, where people see inspectors as like the police who are coming to check that you are conforming to the prevailing ideology. You know, and I think that's where it really goes a bit wrong, because it should be inspectors arriving and just looking at the children and how well are the children learning, not what are you following this particular thing. And they should go, are the children learning really well? Yes, they are. Great. Now, what's the school doing to support that excellent learning? And start from the children and work backwards, rather than start with what are they doing? And then get to the children.
I think what we've lost is a lot of that richness of practice, which HMI used to hunt out. You know, they used to hunt it down because they wanted to identify that. They wanted to celebrate that. What we've got now is a sort of more or less a confirming of what the government's wishes are or what the preferred practice is. And actually there isn't then that sort of like richness of evidence that I think I was aware of when I first joined the inspectorate in 2001. It was really interesting that I actually looked for that HMI. I mean, I think you excited me, Barry, because you got the HMI role before I did. That got me thinking, oh, that's, you know, I thought a lot more about that role. And I remember speaking to you about what did it involve. But actually the National Literacy Strategy saw me off as a head, because I thought I cannot teach that lesson myself.
You know, I didn't, you know, one thing that I don't think we saw as many of those literacy hour clocks and things in Wales as perhaps you had in England, you know, where things were really, I mean, it was like your minutes were constrained around a particular delivery model. It wasn't like a framework, was it? It was like, right, this minute you're doing this, that minute you're doing that. And it was all a little bit crazy. And I think, you know, Stan, you had to be a particular sort of head to stand up to that sort of thing, didn't you?
I would, it'd be very nice to think that, but you also had to be in a particular school where you had the results and
and the teachers.
So I think at the time, and it's a long time ago, but like 50% of the children were level 5 English, when not many schools were anywhere near that. And the last thing I was going to do was change a system that was working in a school where the culture was a really positive. You know, it was a very happy school as well as being academically successful. But I do remember a member of staff who was with me when I was saying these things out loud at a conference, just tapping me on my shoulder and say, Stan, can we not do it, but not do it quietly? let's not alert everyone else to the fact that we're not doing it.
I mean, it'd be interesting to explore your emotions as you said that, because I think a lot of head teachers would feel like when they stand against the current tide, you know, I've been in meetings where, you know, you can feel the room kind of thing, oh, he's the awkward one, he's the reluctant one, he's the one who just doesn't want to change, you know, he's stuck in the mud. Whereas I think you always need those people like you there, because you're like the canary in the coal mine. You're the one who's kind of saying things that other people are not saying, and those are always important voices to hear. But you get this kind of group think that happens, and just like that pendulum I was saying, everybody gets on board, and if you're not on board, you know, if you're not with us, you're against us. That seems to be the prevailing mood. Not that there's a multiplicity of approaches that will work, and we're choosing this one out of this rich variety of tools that are available to teach with. It's almost like no, there's 100 tools, but we're going to throw 98 of them away and say that you've just got to use these two because we've worked out that these two work the best.
And there's also an element about the school itself choosing to adopt an approach. I mean, again, because I'm so old, I can remember real books as an issue that had come from Australia.
I remember that too.
You know, real books where throw away all the reading schemes and then enjoy reading real books.
Yeah.
And you know, it definitely works. Well, it worked in the schools that really adopted it, had come up with it, worked out how to make it work. And then what happens is people copy, but you don't get a perfect copy. You get a slightly different copy and a slightly different copy of that. And eventually what's going on in schools is nothing like the original scheme or the original project. And it's watered down and it doesn't work.
But the other thing I was thinking is what voices get privileged and which ones don't. So in the meeting where you're standing up and saying, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, I can imagine at the next training session of those head teachers, they probably put up somebody who'd really adopted what they wanted and had made a go of it. And that head teacher then stands up, gets all the adulation, and all the other head teachers there think, oh my God, this is what I need to do in order to be successful. This is what I need to do in order to get a good local authority report or a good HMI report. And so that helps then perpetuate this idea that there's just one way of doing it. And that's the way that this successful, inverted commas, head teacher has just told us about. Whereas your voice, I doubt whether the local authority invited you at the next meeting.
Don't forget, it go to another one. To be fair, I'm not sure it was the local authority. I think it was my staff who was saying, please don't go on another one.
Right.
Well, as you can see, I haven't got on to what caught my eye this week, and we're going to we're going to get to the end of this. But for me, I did I was a panel on a virtual conference yesterday, and it really struck me how many, and quite a few of them were not teachers because it was during the day and most schools are back. But there was a sense of a theme running of fatigue, and particularly around secondary school teachers who've been involved in having to do the assessments around the GCSEs and A-levels. And it was really, it made me think about, this sort of privileged position I'm in here where, I can work perhaps 3 days a week. I'm here, on leave, shall I say, just relaxing. I can put my feet up this afternoon, and actually sort of being away from the hustle and bustle of it. And actually, I think it really struck me that, we've got to be very careful, people in our position to be mindful of things that we're not aware of. We need to work harder to find those voices. And I think it really struck me yesterday that what I thought in terms of GCSE assessment was, well, teachers sit down, work out what you know about the kids. You've taught previous year groups, what sort of grade do you think this is going to come out at? But what's happened is Ofqual, in its design not to have grade inflation, have put so many hurdles in the way that teachers feel threatened that they're going to be sort of like picked up and identified if there is any grade inflation. So they've in effect, produced series of in-house tests, and I think there was some research saying that teachers have worked an additional 5 days, basically across the half-term holiday to try and meet the 18th of June deadline for submission of these grades. And so all of that is the fatigue word for me. And actually, I was a great supporter. I didn't know what else you could do other than get the teachers to do the assessments and the gradings. And because as Stan was saying before we came on, some Bolton schools now, are being hit very hard by COVID again. That actually, it was the only way we could make it reasonably fair. But actually, just the word fatigue for me.
Well, just on that, Frank, I was talking to a head this week. You were talking about testing the children when they came back and that being a thing, but they've done some assessments, let's say, and found that the children aren't that far behind, certainly nowhere near as far behind as people were predicting. But the one area that they felt really was an issue was physical fitness.
Yeah.
That the children were far less physically fit than they were beforehand, where they would expect them to be now. So maybe if we're going to have additional hours or whatever the new plan will be, physical things are going to be really important to do. And
I think that's really good idea, Stan. I feel the same. And I feel that, I've always felt that if children are fitter and healthier, they'll learn better as well. And I would really, if I was a teacher now and somebody was saying to me, we're going to chuck a whole load of money at your school and what we want you to do is to actually work more hours, I would kind of feel a bit down about that. Whereas the idea, and also this sort of idea that you chuck the money at the school just so that every child gets something like half an hour extra.
I know.
What is the point of that?
I know.
Much better to do things which are going to encourage physical fitness, community stuff, and have it more targeted at those areas that we know have got greater social and economic deprivation, where children have suffered even more. If you hand it out per head in an even flat way, then it's just going to be unfair again. So
the
I
other
think
thing that was interesting with what he was saying was the children aren't reluctant to join in. He said we've been running some like PE clubs and athletics clubs at lunchtime. He's had 3 times the number of children that he would normally expect, because they're desperate to be able to do things where they involve running around and collaboration with friends, etc.
Yeah.
So it's an open.
And I would, I think a lot of the art and creative stuff as well, do these things which we know have the kind of Carlsberg effect, which get into the parts of the children that perhaps some literacy and numeracy probably don't get into, and explore some of that a bit more. And I think that would be good.
One thing I want to do, because we're getting close to the end of this, is I think we probably won't have time to cover the Ofsted sexual harassment report that came out this week. So perhaps Stan and I can pick that up next week. But Barry, I was quite keen to sort of like just get your take on differences between the Welsh system and the English system, from your angle. What stands out from your view?
Well, I think I started being an inspector in 1991, a long time ago, and there was a lot of close collaboration between the English and the Welsh systems then amongst the inspectors, and basically Wales and England were very much the same. Whereas this is like a Darwinian evolution, really. I always describe it to people like Wales is becoming like Madagascar. And that's because Madagascar used to be part of Africa, and the flora and fauna used to be the same, throughout Africa. But then Madagascar broke away and it developed its own flora and fauna. And that's why you don't have monkeys on Madagascar. You have lemurs. You only have monkeys on Africa. And that's what's happening to Wales. It's drifting slowly apart. So things are getting more and more different. I think over my time, you've gone down a lot of different variety of schools. We still have our community-based primary and secondary schools. We don't have the academy structures and things like that. I would say we've got a more collaborative ethos in Wales. So the inspectorate, local authorities and the government and schools, for example, the new curriculum, it's all been developed by practitioners in Wales, by teachers in Wales, rather than top-down models. So I would say we still have, and the inspectorate have been part of that, what's called co-construction. That's the new word in Wales, co-construction, everybody working together. We decided in the inspectorate, I'm not in it anymore, I've retired, but we decided to have a year when we wouldn't inspect schools. So we haven't produced, and that just happened to be the year we had the COVID, which was quite sort of strange. But the idea was we wouldn't inspect schools, we'd take away that big accountability thing, because what we wanted schools to do was to develop their curriculum. And inspectors would go into schools and support schools in developing the new curriculum for Wales, which is just coming out. So, we got a new curriculum with all these 4 purposes. We've stopped using subjects. We've got areas of learning.
What are they, Barry? What are those areas of learning? Can you remember?
Well,
it's the test now.
Expressive arts, health and well-being, humanities, language literacy and communication, mathematics and numeracy, and science and technology. Right. So those are the 5 areas, and we've got 4 purposes which are there for all of the curriculum. So we want children to be ambitious and capable learners, enterprising creative contributors, ethical informed citizens, and healthy and confident individuals.
Wow.
And within the 6 areas of learning, we've got 27 what matter statements, which try to be the big ideas, the key concepts that we want children to grasp at the end of their curriculum. So, it's been a lot of work. And because it's been quite democratic, it's not like 10 people in a room who just decide what it's going to be. And here you go. It's been a lot of teachers working together with researchers, with the Welsh Government. We've had HMI on the panels as well, trying to, develop this curriculum. So it's taken time. It's had a few sort of, bumps along the way and things like that. But the whole point was for teachers to feel like it was their curriculum, not a top-down curriculum that they were just given and said, there you go, it doesn't matter what you think, this is what you've got to deliver. So it's been constructed like that, co-constructed, to use the key word, to try to kind of get that buy-in from teachers. So, we've got other things. We've got our own foundation phase for, 5 to 7-year-olds, which is based upon experiential, a lot of outdoor learning. We've got our own Welsh baccalaureate qualification for secondary schools. We've got our, unique to Wales, we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which came into force in 2015, something like that. And that, again, is all based upon creating, a more equal Wales, a more prosperous Wales, a more resilient Wales, a healthy Wales, a globally responsive Wales, a vibrant culture, vibrant language.
That's a bit of the levelling up. That's the sort of levelling up agenda, isn't it?
Well, I think you'd struggle to use the word levelling up in Wales. Because, that wouldn't be. The way Wales would like to be levelled up is in terms of its funding, because the funding per pupil in Wales is less than any other region. And there's a lot of historical difficulties there relating to the Barnett formula, which was established, when was that? Back in the 60s, was it? And so it still runs very much according to those things, where Wales still had a lot of coal mining, it still had a lot of those heavy industries. And so the Barnett formula wasn't particularly generous to Wales, but it's far more generous to Northern Ireland and to Scotland. And so we still suffer, we think, in terms of our funding per pupil and funding given to the government in relation to the extent of economic and social deprivation that we have now in Wales, particularly with the loss of all that heavy industry. So we have some quite difficult communities in Wales and we have those challenges and those problems, and don't feel as though we often get enough recognition from central government in relation to that. But the COVID pandemic has meant, of course, that most people have seen Mark Drakeford a lot more.
Yes.
And have seen the Welsh Government actually doing things as a Welsh Government, and listening to Cardiff rather than listening to Westminster. And of course, that did lead to quite a strong Labour result in the recent election. And I think that, again, is feeding this idea of drift towards Wales, people's attention focusing far more on what's happening in Wales, made by Wales for Wales is kind of, a sort of a mantra that goes around. And I think that's kind of growing.
I think it's interesting, Drakeford, there are comparisons with him and Boris Johnson, I have to say, in dress. That Mark Drakeford never quite gets the tie in the right place. But there is a sort of, he was on Newsnight last night. I saw him last night, and actually, but there is a sort of, it's not about him. That comes over very strongly, I think, and that sort of lack of attention to the tie is endearing, for me anyway. As a, but for the Prime Minister, it's all part of his show. The fact that the hair isn't quite right, the way he stands, all of that seems to be part of, this is what I'm about. It's about me, Whereas I think that there's that sense of certainly it comes over a certain sense of honesty that Mark Drakeford pushes over, can convey, which you always feel as though somebody else might be on the game,
I think he's genuinely interested in the ideas. I mean, because he was a university lecturer. I mean, the other comparison is he studied Latin, just like Johnson's from Drakeford studied Latin at the University of Exeter and things like that. But I do, and that's before he got into a lot of doing research in social policy and things. But I think he's genuinely interested in the ideas, and I don't think he's playing games. And I think he wants to get genuine results, not because it plays to the newspaper or it plays to a particular faction. I think he genuinely wants, and this is the impression I get. I mean, I don't know him as a person. I'm an elector in Wales, you know, but I genuinely feel as though he wants the best for Wales, not the best for Mark Drakeford.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've got, this is probably going to be one of the longest editions.
Oh,
so, no, but I'm very, I mean, it's been fascinating, really has. And thank you,
It's
Barry.
a Welsh version, Frank. You're going to spend ages now translating everything.
Yeah, it costs you a fortune.
There was a, Barry will know this, but there's a school friend of mine called Rick Dawson, who now lives in Modena in Italy. And he watches these, and of course you can get these on YouTube with translations, or with subtitles underneath. Frankenstein always comes over as the Frankenstein chat. So I don't know what this will do in Welsh, but anyway.
Well, look, you're in Wales and Stan's in Wales. I'm sure there's an opportunity there for you to learn some Welsh, and the next time that you have a Welsh version, we'll be able to have some conversation in Welsh.
Right, well, Barry, would you like to say cheerio in Welsh? How would you say that in Welsh?
Well, diolch yn fawr iawn I chi I gyd am y gyfle siarad tipyn bach o Gymraeg yn y videocast Stan a Frank. Diolch yn fawr.
Yeah.
So just thank you very much for the opportunity, to speak a little bit of Welsh during the Stan and Frank videocast.
Well, Barry, that is a first. So thank you very much.
The other thing that's the first there is he called it the Stan and Frank. So clearly I've been promoted now.
Look, Stan, when it comes to my brother, he's got to go to the back of the queue every time. This is 16 months apart. You've got to have a bit of sibling rivalry going on.
Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that video cast. I certainly have. And we'll be back next week. We have a series of guests coming up and taking us right into August and beyond. So thank you for joining. And actually, the last month, we've had the highest viewing figures ever. And also the podcast that it goes out on has been downloaded more times than any other month. So it's fantastic. So thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see you all next week.